Nothing about this investigation makes sense, which means that in a roundabout way, it makes perfect sense. This is what you get when you hire university presidents and police chiefs based on their gender and ethnicity. It's what you get when you tolerate riots and terrorism on college campuses all over the country in the name of global jihad. Past a certain point, incompetence starts to be indistinguishable from malice. People who are so extraordinarily terrible at their jobs to the degree that they cause serious harm to others should be treated just as harshly, if not more harshly, than bad actors who intend to cause damage in the first place. If you take a shower one day and you end up getting electrocuted, doesn't really matter from a practical perspective whether your electrician meant to kill you or not when he hooked up your wiring in the bathroom. The effect is that you're dead. The electrician is to blame, and he should pay the highest price for that. Now, Brown University, the Ivy League school in Providence, Rhode Island, has now crossed the threshold into extreme incompetence that is indistinguishable from malice. So have local authorities in Providence, as well as any federal authorities who are working on the case. On Saturday at 4 p.m., as you may have heard, nearly 5 days ago, a gunman shot 11 people on the campus of Brown University. One of the two victims who died was the vice president of the university's chapter of the College Republicans. There are reports that she may have been targeted and that she was shot multiple times at close range. And in the aftermath of this mass shooting and possible political assassination, the university and authorities have bungled the case so flagrantly, so many times, that they may as well be working with the shooter. We truly have never seen a high-profile murder investigation that's been botched as extensively as this one, at least not in recent memory. Now, whether it's being botched deliberately or not, doesn't really matter. And therefore, if you're a conservative, particularly if you're an outspoken conservative on campus or at work or anywhere, that means you need to start taking steps to ensure your own safety. Assume absolutely nothing about the level of concern that your administrators or bosses or superiors may have for your well-being, because the odds are they have no concern for that whatsoever. They'll celebrate your death and they'll let your killer escape. So let's start with this hypothetical. Let's say that you run the Brown University Department of Public Safety, or the Providence Police Department, or the FBI's local field office in Rhode Island. And then let's say that during a study session in a lecture hall at the local university, which was attended by many students, there's a mass shooting, and the shooter runs away. What's the first thing you're going to do in order to identify the shooter? So odds are you're going to do two things. You're going to check one of the 1,200 surveillance cameras that Brown has admitted are installed on campus to see if they picked up anything. And then while those cameras are being reviewed 24/7, you're going to interview every witness, especially the students who were attending the study session. You're going to talk to every single one of them. You're going to take statements from those students about what the shooter looked like and what he may have said and where he may have gone, what exactly happened, and so on. And if you don't know the names of the students who are taking the class or who are in the building, you get it from the school. You see who swiped into the building. You check the class roster. It should take like 10 seconds. This is all common sense. I mean, it almost feels absurd to say any of this out loud because your average third grader would understand all of it. And yet on Wednesday, we learned that the authorities still have not spoken to all of the witnesses in the room where the shooting occurred. This is footage of the Providence Police Chief, Oscar Perez. Watch.
Colonel, can you now explain to us 5 days later how many students were in that classroom? Sadly, 2 lost their lives, 9 others injured. Encouraged about the update today. But can you now say how many kids were in that classroom? And did the gunman come in from the back so these people never knew it was coming? Or did he come in front with full view of everybody?
And that's all part of the interviews, and actually we're cooperating with Brown to get the roster. That was a study hall, so we don't have the number. We're still getting information as far as who was there. I know Brown sent out an email to the students to notify us if they were present, and we're still getting that, so I can't give you an exact account now.
So he can barely speak English, but it's okay because the Providence City Council made racial equity a top priority after George Floyd's overdose. So don't worry about it. And by the way, while we're at it, here's an image of the head of Brown's Police Department, a guy named Rodney Chapman, who you can see here on the screen. And he's been the subject of multiple no-confidence votes by multiple police unions in the past year. But don't worry. Like the female president of Brown and the Spanish-speaking chief of police in Providence, Rodney Chapman is diverse. So, it's all okay. Yes, everybody involved in this debacle at every level is diverse, quote unquote. Imagine that. Now, in any event, the upshot from the police chief's comments, as best I can decipher, is that the Providence Police Department is still trying to figure out who was even there in the room when the shooting happened 5 days ago, which is an extraordinary admission. I mean, this is the lowest caliber of police work imaginable under the circumstances. And then he made reference to this statement from Brown University, which was sent out on Monday evening, 2 full days after the shooting. Quote, the Providence Police Department has asked that anyone who was in Barris and Holly, the building where the shooting occurred, on Friday or Saturday, December 12th through 13th, arrange for an interview. And they provide an email address to contact. Now, that's a request that should have gone out immediately on Saturday night. And they really shouldn't need to make the request because, again, the building should have been locked down immediately and everyone should have been identified on the spot with a class roster or with the access card readers or with cameras. But if that's not possible for some reason, then you still need to conduct the witness interviews immediately one way or another. Instead, the police and university waited 48 hours to reach out to potential witnesses. And 100 hours after the fact, they still haven't conducted those interviews. Now, there are only 2 possible ways to explain this delay. Either the police and the school want to assist the shooter in making his escape. That's one possibility. We can't rule it out. Or everybody involved is criminally incompetent and needs to be fired and treated as if they were accomplices after the fact. Those are the 2 options. When you zoom out and consider the timeline of this debacle, you really can't come to any other conclusion. First of all, just hours after the shooting, the authorities announced that they had identified a person of interest in the shooting. His name and photograph were plastered everywhere. It was a white guy who had some military experience. And then within 24 hours, they released him, saying they didn't have enough evidence to hold him. And after that, the first surveillance images of another potential suspect surfaced from ring cameras in the neighborhood. And this new suspect looked absolutely nothing like their first person of interest. The new suspect was much, much larger, much less physically fit. So right away, that raised the question of why they suspected the white guy in the first place. And then on Monday, the authorities conceded that the shooter had shouted something that many, many people would have heard. But they refused to say more. They also didn't address speculation the shooter may have shouted Allah Akbar, as some outlets had reported. Instead, they gave a vague and kind of equivocal response. Watch.
Now, there's a report the shooter yelled something right before his shot came in. Could you tell us what that was?
Yeah, it's part of the investigation, Johnny. Yeah.
Now, the only reason I asked that, though, is, for instance, like with the Unabomber, his brother recognized the writing. So it's possible a friend or family member might recognize if the person said something that was significant.
Correct.
That's why you don't, other than the 9mm, is there anything else inside that auditorium that you could tell us?
No, that's correct. And listen, like I said earlier, investigations will bring us to evidence that we need to collect in order to be able to prosecute. With that being said, we're going to continue to collect evidence, and if it leads us to something to that nature that's going to be extremely helpful for us to identify somebody, we'll be the first ones to put it out.
Now imagine if the shooter had yelled or even been rumored to have yelled something like, "This is MAGA country." Is there any doubt they'd tell us that within like 5 seconds of the shooting? All of their hesitation and doublespeak, it's also obviously fake and performative at this point. And of course, when you get doublespeak and nonsense, you get an information void. And when there's an information void in every single case, it gets filled with speculation, for better or worse. So as it became clear that the authorities weren't going to share any meaningful information, internet sleuths got to work, and they identified as a potential person of interest a Brown student and self-described Palestinian refugee with a very public profile whose body type was a rough match with the surveillance images. And this new individual is clearly a radical leftist. He had social media accounts with exotic personal pronouns, sympathized with Hamas, boasted about his extensive work at, quote, the intersection of queer studies and Palestine studies. which seems like it has to be some kind of parody, but it's real. You know, the intersection of queer studies and Palestine studies is a bit like, you know, the intersection of transgenderism and the Taliban. The only relevant intersection in Palestine as it relates to homosexuals is the intersection where the gays land when they get thrown off of roofs. And nevertheless, Brown University's PR department had aggressively promoted this guy as a migrant success story who was bravely showing the white man who's boss. Now, is this Palestinian refugee studying the intersection of queer studies and Palestine studies also the shooter? I have no idea. No one does. It's all wild speculation from random people on the internet. That's why I'm not going to name him. I'm just telling you that this is what's going on. It's part of the story. But then something strange happened. This guy's social media profiles began disappearing. So did the glowing articles that Brown had posted on their website about him. And then Brown posted this statement online, quote, "We've seen harmful doxing actively directed at least one member of the Brown University community. It's important to make clear that targeting individuals could do irrevocable harm. Accusations, speculation, and conspiracies we're seeing on social media and in some news reports are irresponsible, harmful, and in some cases dangerous for the safety of individuals in our community. It's not unusual as a safety measure to take steps to protect an individual's safety when this kind of activity happens, including in regard to their online presence. As law enforcement officials stated, if this individual's name had any relevance to the current investigation, they would be actively looking for this individual and providing information publicly." Now, superficially, in general, it seems like a kind of reasonable response. It would obviously be horrible to publicly smear an innocent man as a potential suspect in a mass shooting, which is why it was horrible that just a few days ago, the authorities did exactly that by naming an innocent white guy as their suspect. But there are two strange aspects of this statement from Brown. First of all, it's not an explicit denial. They don't clearly and unambiguously deny that this Palestinian refugee, quote unquote, is a suspect or that he's being investigated. They could have just said that, but they didn't. Instead, they imply that his name doesn't have relevance to the current investigation, which is a weird way of saying that he's not a suspect, if that's what they're saying. Note the weird phrasing in that message where they say, if this name had any relevance to the investigation. And we'll come back to that in a second. Secondly, there's reason to doubt that the department would, in fact, inform the public if this individual did become a suspect. A Providence police major in charge of the investigation admitted to reporters that, in fact, there are some facts that they are hiding from, quote, public view. Watch.
Just here in furtherance of the investigation into the Brown University shooting. There's really not much I can tell you, like I told you before, but it's just the investigation running its course. Now, this investigation, you know, it's got to be run right, and sometimes you have to do things that, you know, aren't in the public view as of yet. Not that we're hiding anything, it's just the way we work. So that's why we haven't been able to give you much information, but we're trying to do the best job we can, and some things we have to keep, you know, out of the public light until we're ready to come out with everything.
Well, it's not exactly a rousing promise of transparency, and it gets worse when you listen to what the president of Brown and the Rhode Island Attorney General said separately. The president of Brown said that she has no idea that the university is deleting websites. She had no idea that they're deleting websites about this person. And the Attorney General basically shouted down reporters who asked about the individual. But again, he didn't explicitly rule him out as a suspect either. So we'll play those two clips back to back. Watch.
Leave some web pages for students or faculty who've been taken down. Is that a response to any external threats to anyone in the community?
We have been working very closely with law enforcement to provide them with all of the internal to Brown information that they need to do this investigation. It's their investigation. They're the professionals. So we're providing information. We're not in the job of reviewing it for them. I know nothing about web pages being taken down as part of this. It's the first I've heard of it.
There are lots of reasons why a page might be taken down, particularly if there's chatter out there about, to your question, Amanda, about words that were spoken. It's easy to jump from someone saying words that were spoken to what those words are, to a particular name that reflects a motive targeting a particular person. That's a really dangerous road to go down. really dangerous. If that name meant anything to this investigation, we would be out looking for that person. We would let you know we were looking for that person. You know, again, I think it's just a really dangerous road to go down. I know that in today's age, there are lots of things that people read into things. It's just a dangerous thing to do. And I would leave it to us to identify persons of interest and let us run them down. What the public can do for us today is help us figure out who this guy is.
Now, first of all, why is the Attorney General appearing at these press conferences at all? The job of the Attorney General is to prosecute state-level offenses. So what is he doing at this stage when there's an active investigation? Imagine if you're this student and you've been falsely smeared all over the internet, and instead of defending you and clearly stating that you're not remotely a suspect, the Attorney General barges into the press conference for no reason, grandstands, and threatens reporters for asking about you. I'd be livid. If you were actually innocent, you'd be livid about that. Secondly, notice the phrasing he used. He says, if that name meant anything to this investigation, then they tell us the name. It's just virtually identical to the language in the statement that Brown released. And it's a very strange, tortured way to make the point. Why not just say, if that individual was relevant to the investigation, we'd tell you he's not a suspect or even a person of interest, period. But they could just say that. The individual you're talking about is not a suspect. He is not a person of interest. End of story. But they're not saying that. Instead, they keep saying that the guy's name isn't relevant. It's very odd to repeat the same phrasing, especially when the phrasing is so awkward. Now, yet, it's possible, yes, that they're trying and failing to clearly state that he's not a suspect or a person of interest. Maybe these people are all foreign language speakers or something, and they lack the capacity to clearly spell out a simple thought. But it's also possible, based on what they're saying, that they're not ruling this guy out as a potential person of interest just yet. Maybe they're trying to say that, well, maybe he is a person of interest, but his name, you don't need to know his name. His name is not relevant to you. His name doesn't matter. Maybe that's what they're saying. Who knows what they're saying? We don't know. But that possibility became even more pronounced yesterday when the following image was released of a separate person of interest in the case. Now, this surveillance image appears to show a woman wearing a black hijab walking near the crime scene and the original person of interest in the case. And obviously this image raises the specter once again of Islamist terrorism. It raises the question of whether foreigners and leftists have once again murdered Westerners as part of their global jihad, or their intifada, as the mayor of New York prefers to call it. And if that is indeed what happened here, and again, we have no idea at this point, then it becomes very relevant and very important to revisit Brown's claims about the cameras on their campus. I came across this article from Brown's student newspaper, which was published back in March. It's about how the students at Brown were upset at the situation at Columbia, another Ivy League school where leftist criminals are rampant. And here's what it says, quote, on Thursday afternoon, approximately 200 students gathered on the main green at Brown to protest the arrest and detainment of Columbia alum and activist Mahmoud Khalil by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers at Columbia on Saturday. The protesters also requested the university destroy footage of past and future political speech on campus, including security camera footage. So the left-wing pro-Palestine activists are demanding that Brown erase security camera footage, supposedly so that ICE and the Trump administration can't deport them when they commit crimes. Did Brown comply in any way with that demand? There are many more demands like it all year long. And that's not surprising. Leftists despise surveillance cameras, particularly Ring cameras, because they tend to catch Democrat voters committing crimes. Now, yesterday, a reporter asked this specific question at one of these press conferences, and once again, the authorities did not answer.
The camera in that building that Brown put up because the sanctuary city law that we have, you don't want to record illegal immigrants, and you don't want to provide the footage to the FBI or immigration authority. One camera in that building, it come out from your detectives, they are friends of mine, they're angry at this investigation that these people in Brown University put the camera off, they can identify that person. You imagine how the family want to go through? Tell the truth to the media here.
We
putting cameras off.
we heard from both the Brown police chief and the provost at Brown, who have shared that they have been fully cooperative and been forthcoming with all data and evidence that they have.
That was not the only moment the authorities gave an unsatisfactory answer on this point. 2 days ago, the Attorney General stated that some buildings on campus are old, and therefore it's simply unrealistic to expect a multi-billion-dollar university to put cameras on those buildings. This is reminiscent of the Secret Service's excuse about sloped rooftops, if you remember that. Watch.
It doesn't come as a surprise to me, at least, that there are cameras in the newer part of the building. And there is video footage, okay? So there's the back part of the building, old part, and front part, new part. The shooting occurs in the old part, towards the back, up towards Hope Street. In that older part of the building, there are fewer, if any, cameras in that location. I imagine because it's an older building. So as students are fleeing the area of the shooting into the new part of the building, there are cameras in that brand new building that show that chaos. But the only video of the presumed, anticipated, suspected, however you want to define it, person of interest, you have it. We would release it if we thought it would be helpful in identifying this subject, because we are relying on the press and public to help get us there. There would be no reason for us to hold it back. We're looking for the best image.
Now, the answer never made any sense. For one thing, as Fox reported, there are older buildings on the campus, including the president's residence, that have cameras. And secondly, it's not hard to install a camera on a building of any age. You can install a camera on a tree trunk if you want to. You just need a drill. I mean, it's like claiming that you can't wear brand new shoes and walk on a really old floor. It makes no sense. It's like if someone says, hey, your shoes look really old. Well, yeah, the floor's old. What do you expect? You need to get some new shoes. Well, I can't. You know how old these floors are? The Daily Wire Shop's best deals of the year are still live, and you can get up to 70% off. Save big on my best-selling game, Am I Racist?, based on my hit documentary that melted the DEI-obsessed minds of race hustlers across the globe. We've got the golden Leftist Tears tumbler, extremely limited supply and only back while supplies last. The collected poems of Donald J. Trump, plus hats, t-shirts, hoodies, and a whole lot more you can't find anywhere else. Head to dailywire.com/shop right now before these deals expire. dailywire.com/shop. But there's no need to overthink it, because within 24 hours, this answer completely changed once again. Suddenly, according to Brown's provost, there were cameras in the building. Turns out. And as a reporter pointed out before he was cut off, the provost's answer was nonsensical. Watch.
100 cameras located throughout the campus. We don't publish the locations of the cameras. That would give a map to somebody to evade detection on the cameras. So that would be counterproductive to do that. There are cameras in this building, and as I answered the previous question, we have turned over all evidence that we are holding at Brown to law enforcement and are cooperating fully with them.
So you're saying that there's a camera, you're saying there's cameras in the building. I was told yesterday there wasn't cameras in the building. The Attorney General said, old building, no cameras, attached to a new building with cameras.
I believe he said that there were two different phases of the building that might have two different levels of technology. Again, all video imagery has been turned over to law enforcement.
That doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Just want to say that.
So that about sums it up. Nothing about this investigation makes sense, which means that in a roundabout way, it makes perfect sense. This is what you get when you hire university presidents and police chiefs based on their gender and ethnicity. It's what you get when you tolerate riots and terrorism on college campuses all over the country in the name of global jihad. And most of all, it's what you get when leftists, from students to school administrators to public officials, feel like their ideology is losing at a national level. You get dead conservatives, and then you get gloating. The account Aesthetic on X, which has been one of the most trustworthy sources for investigations like this, reported that in the aftermath of Saturday's attack, quote, a Brown University subreddit had to be shut down because in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, far-left pro-Palestine Redditors were celebrating the murder of Ella Cook, college Republicans VP who was killed. So it's the same gloating we saw from the left after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the murder of a United Healthcare CEO, and of course, after the murder of Charlie Kirk. And now we're seeing the same gloating after the murder of a conservative student on a college campus. You know, this is what happens when our leaders are more concerned about Venezuela than protecting conservatives and dismantling left-wing terror cells. Leftists gloat openly about butchering their political opponents and don't even try to hide it. And based on how the very diverse leaders of Brown University and the local police department have handled this so-called investigation, it's not exactly a stretch to conclude that when the cameras are turned off after these ridiculous press conferences, they're gloating too. Hey YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.